All righty, committee, we're going to get this thing underway and call the meeting to order. First of all, we've got a hearing today on House Bill 2145. This is a bill similar to the Senate Bill 133 that we heard. And for those of you watching online, welcome. You can go to ks.gov, go to the committees tab, select standing, select Senate, select utilities, and then committee testimony, and click in the date box and you can find the testimony. It should be uploaded here, if not immediately, very, very shortly. So we're going to go ahead and hear first from Matt Sterling from the Office of the Revisers. And Matt, give us an overview of House Bill 2145.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee. House Bill 2145 would amend KSA 66104 concerning the definition of public utilities that are subject to the jurisdiction of the KCC. The bill would exempt from public utility regulation any activity of an otherwise jurisdictional entity for the marketing or sale of electricity if it was purchased through a retail electric supplier in the certified territory of the retail electric supplier for the sole purpose of the provision of electric vehicle charging services to end users. So under the bill, those vehicle charging services would not be regulated as a public utility. And as the chairman indicated, if this bill seems familiar, it's identical to Senate Bill 133 that the committee heard earlier this session. Happy to try to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Committee, any questions? Seeing none. By the way, it did pass the House 124 to 0. It was unanimous in the House. So we've got a number of conferees. Let's start off with Jeff McClanahan, who is checking in WebEx from the Utilities Division of Kansas Corporation Commission. Jeff?
Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, sir, we sure can.
Great. Well, good afternoon. My name is Jeff McClanahan, and I'm the Director of the Utilities Division for the Kansas Corporation Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today. We remain a proponent of HB 2145. We support a free market approach to EV charging stations, and HB 2145 will accomplish that. And importantly, it will allow the KCC to continue to protect an emerging free market with EV charging stations. 2145 allows the KCC to determine whether it's appropriate or not to put in EV charging stations into rate base for any utility that applies for such. So with that, I'll just stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McClanahan. Committee, any questions for Mr. McClanahan? Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just ask a question that I think Senator Hawk had earlier, which is, would this provide, the fact that it's not under regulation of the KCC, provide an opportunity? I think he used price gouging. I am not concerned because I think there's enough other opportunities for charging, but I don't know if you have any comments about that.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I think the market will develop quick enough that it's going to be difficult for price gouging. I think, convenience stores or gas stations are logical places to put in some additional EV charging stations, and it's going to be like a lot of other places. Folks will figure out really quickly if somebody's really higher than the other. The other part of this, right, is that we can set the rates that a utility can charge for an EV charging service. And so we currently have an application by Evergy in front of us that requests to rate base some EV charging stations. And we'll be setting the rates for what the Evergy can charge for those. So with a utility that's still in the mix, albeit not to dissuade the development of the free market, I think we can help moderate any desire for price gouging. So I think it could be controllable.
Thank you. I'm hearing that because some of those chargers, if they're managed by a utility, will have a limit. And so that establishes at least an affordable price for those people looking for those charging stations. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. McClanahan. We do have another oral proponent, John Federico, who's not listed on here, but if John, you'll come on up and give us your testimony on this bill very quickly.
Just spilt water on my tie. One last sip of water. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because of the oddity of the hearing where you've already heard all of the testimony, I thought I would provide just an overview, and I will provide written comments summarizing everything, and I will be very brief. I am John Federico of Federico Durst Consulting, and I represent ChargePoint, who installs the electric charging stations. I think a lot of it has been covered. This is very similar to Senate Bill 133. The bill also passed the House last year, was heard in this committee in the 2020 session, but in a COVID-shortened session, it was one of the casualties. So I think we have heard plenty of testimony on this particular issue. You had mentioned it, similar to the Senate. In the House hearing, there were no opponents. There's no fiscal note, and it did pass 124 to nothing. The conferees in support were very varied. ChargePoint and Tom Pallas and his group were the principal proponents. Justin Wilson from ChargePoint, who is online to answer any technical questions anyone might have. And then Mark Augustine representing Tom Pallas and his association. We worked extensively over the course of maybe as long as 3 years, at least a couple of years, with the KCC and with Evergy to work through the particulars of the language, because it's very important as you get into some of the regulatory act that you accomplish exactly what you want to do and you don't stray too far from that. So we appreciate the work of the KCC. We appreciate the work of Evergy and their support. Other conferees were the Kansas Electric Cooperatives, CURB, Metropolitan Energy Center, EV Build, and more interestingly, and that representative is here, Stanley Rasmussen, on behalf of the Department of the Army, saying, at least with regards, at the minimum with regards to transport vehicles, this is the future. This is what the Army is looking at, so more options are better options as far as they're concerned. This is actually a very simple, straightforward bill, and I think at the end of the day, that's been my undoing. The simpler it is, the more complicated it seems. It exempts retail sales of electricity through electric vehicle charging stations from KCC jurisdiction. End of story. That's all it does. It's not whether we should allow these because they're here. It's a matter of whether you believe they should or should not be regulated the same as a public utility. That's what this bill does. There are a lot of issues raised, and I think they merit conversation. I think they merit scrutiny, but we would respectfully suggest that those are separate issues for a separate bill, not under consideration for the very simple thing that this does. At the end of the day, there are people that want to invest. Oklahoma has changed their law or made clear what their law should be. Missouri, Colorado, Nebraska's got some funky rules up there. And so if we want investment in Kansas, this is but one way. And I think Tom Pallas's person, Mr. Augustine, immediately wants to start installing these. And so we'd rather have it come here. To us, again, it seems logical. There are a lot of other related issues, but again, they're separate and I think worth consideration under separate bills. We would appreciate your support for this. I'm happy to answer any questions, or Mr. Wilson.
Committee, any questions for Mr. Federico? Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, what's the cost of one of these fast chargers lights going in at convenience stores? There's ones that are doing in 7 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, that might be a Justin Wilson question.
Justin, can you answer that?
I can, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. I would say that a fast charger is really going to depend on how fast, but they can range anywhere from $30,000 up to $100,000 or $150,000 for some very fast ones. And that is just part of the investment. In addition to the investment on the charging station itself, there's a decent amount of construction work that needs to be done. And so that's civil construction work, concrete work, electrical work that needs to go into it. And that can be equal, if not more, than the cost of the charging station itself.
Thank you.
Committee, any other questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, when they have these charging stations, and will they be operational enough to where if we decide someday as a level playing field for taxes to pay for our highways, people going through the state, that would be kind of an uncomplicated thing to do? I hate to see them spend a lot of money on something that we would change down the road. Is that a pretty simple thing to build into those? I've never seen a charging station. So is Oklahoma charging? That's what
I think the very simple answer to that question is anyone who, in a free market society that wants to invest with the threat that there could be a change in regulation, a change in law, on any of that. We do know that we took up a similar issue in the Transportation Committee's Chairman Peterson, I don't know if it was last session or the session before, where to make up for some of that difference between the gas tax, they increased the vehicle registration fees for electric vehicles, which would equate to an average car being driven 12,000 miles a year, would make up the difference. So they are addressing it now. I think that as those come up where you think changes need to be made, they have to take that into consideration before they invest.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just kind of follow-up. The one I really care about is the guy going through the state that's going to charge up somewhere, getting that out-of-state tax to help with our highways. So you envision on these charging stations, that's something that down the road could be worked through?
I think so, yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Senator Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How many of these charging stations do you envision across the state?
Well, again, I'll turn to anyone in the audience or Mr. Wilson that are actually in the business to make a prediction on that. But I look at it as, personally, as we've reviewed this over the course of 2 years, it's attracting people to the state. They don't just charge up, they're buying things. Their route is now I-70 rather than an alternative route because they have options. I look at it as a cascading investment in these small communities around the state as people travel through, non-Kansans. But perhaps Mr. Wilson has an answer as to how many.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say that we're still trying to understand that a little bit more. The charging infrastructure comes along at the same time as the vehicles. A lot of people talk about a chicken or an egg, and what we see is they actually come together pretty quickly. That's the way that free markets work. If let's say a convenience store operator puts in one electric vehicle charging station and he notices that it's being used 5, 6, 7, 8 times a day, he may be likely to put in another one so that his customers may not have to wait to use that charging station. For the highway corridors, what we are seeing is that about every 50 miles is what states are planning the electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So in some states, they have actual policies in place that encourage every 50 miles an electric vehicle charging station to be located within a certain distance of those interstate exits.
Will there be like, if you don't mind, a couple follow-up, will the price be guaranteed, you know, like you see gas prices, signs? I mean, what if we get in a situation where we were in the other day with the blackouts and that, and price of, you know, natural gas went through the roof, so I'm guessing the price of power went through the roof. So are you gonna see them wide span of, you know, increases? It goes from charging for $5 and next thing you know, it's $200. I mean,
Yeah,
or
listen,
are
I
they gonna
think,
be blocked in at a rate that's guaranteed?
I think that's a fair question, honestly, but I think it's competition. Competition is what's going to control this more than anything.
So are you guys committed to helping us find the right value of what the gas equivalent is on what we're losing? I mean, if we come in over the summer, you know, I think this is still my biggest problem is you get so many of these out there. You know, I'm afraid that we're going to lock ourselves in. That's going to be the price, and we can't collect the proper equivalent of the gas tax that we're losing. We need to be able to collect that equivalent to keep these roads up. I mean, these people are in these electric cars. They're going to be driving up and down our roads, but we want to make sure we're getting our fair share.
I'll turn it over to Mr. Wilson, but I can tell you that this has occupied a lot of conversation at the federal level, and they're looking for a 50-state solution because this isn't unique to Kansas, and they're trying to figure out how to make this work.
Mr. Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Directly to Senator Olson's questions, I'm happy to commit to working with you and other members of the Senate and the House on a structure that would help address road use charges and how we make sure that EV drivers are paying their fair share. It is ChargePoint's perspective that as we transition many of our light duty vehicles and potentially medium and heavy duty vehicles to electric, this is an issue that we need to address. As Mr. Federico stated, we are looking for a federal solution, and there are a couple of important pilot projects that have been in use. So one in the state of Utah, they have a pilot that's ongoing about ways to collect revenues from vehicles. There's also an ongoing program in Oregon that's been operating for many years to try and address this exact same thing to make sure that all vehicle users are paying their fair share.
Sorry, Mr. Wilson, I failed to ask you to state your name and who you're with so that people online would know.
My apologies. My name is Justin Wilson, and I'm with ChargePoint.
Thank you, sir.
Just my comment at the end is I'm not really for the electric cars. I think a lot of people forget about what you're going to have to do with the batteries. There's a lot of cost that that's not accounted for. You're not going to be able to charge every car in Kansas with wind. You're going to have to build either nuclear or coal. So, I mean, you're going to have to grow more, you're going to build more power plants. But I know there's a lot of people pushing this. Also, the life of a battery, you know, when it was 19 below, what's that battery like when it's 19 below? Does it have 200 miles of charge or does it have, 50 miles of charge? You know, I'd hate for someone to be alongside of the road freezing to death because they have no heat because their battery's drained. So, I mean, these are challenges I have, but I mean, definitely understand what you're doing. John, thank you.
Senator Pyle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have a couple questions. I'll start with the easiest one first. John, electric charging stations, I understand you can pay with credit card. Can you pay with cash?
Mr. Wilson?
Mr. Wilson? And again, identify yourself, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Justin Wilson with ChargePoint. Senator Pyle, I can tell you the ways that we allow customers to pay on our charging station. Those customers, first and foremost, there's always a 1-800 number that a customer can call in order to initiate a charging session. We accept credit cards through contactless payment, through Apple Pay, through Android Pay. You can also load a credit card or debit card onto the ChargePoint app, which gives you real-time pricing and real-time status of the charging stations themselves. Many of these charging stations are, in particular, charge points are unmanned, so they do not have somebody who is monitoring them 24/7, 365. They do not accept cash at this time.
Thank you. And I'll just follow up to, since you seem to be aware, I should have probably asked research for this, but what are other states doing as to, it seems like I read an article a few months back, some states are already implementing that their state vehicles would be electric. Can you give us an update on that? Is that actually happening yet to where states would start, once the charging places are in place, starting mandating that their state agencies and their vehicles like KDOT or other entities would be having electric vehicles out there? Can you give us an update on that nationally?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pyle, I actually don't have an update on what states are doing with their own vehicle fleets. I will say that I'm aware of many states procuring electric vehicles for a portion of their fleet needs. However, I'm not aware of a state that has a very specific a regulation related to their own fleets.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's just another concern. You know, this is the pre-dance step to getting the charging stations in place so that the state can mandate and start saying that a percentage of our vehicles will be electric. And I'm not talking about individual personal, I'm talking about state agency vehicles. Because if I remember right, I think we did that with some of the ethanol. It's been a long time. I can't remember all of that. But as to the concerns as to out-of-state use, et cetera, I've aired that on 133. I won't air it again, but I do have a amendment when we work this bill, Mr. Chairman, just to make sure you're notified again. And I believe we'll address those concerns and fix that. So I'll wait till the appropriate time when you work the bill. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Federico. We do have written proponent testimony from Kelly Gilbert, the Clean Cities Coordinator, and Tammy Alexander, Program Coordinator, Central Kansas Clean Cities, from Laura Lutz from Evergy, Doug Shepard from Kansas Electric Cooperatives, and Stanley Rasmussen from the Department of Defense. We do have written neutral testimony from David Nickel of the Citizens Utility Rate Board, and no opponent testimony. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to testify on behalf of the bill? Seeing none, any other neutral proponents? And any other opponents? Seeing none, since we have heard the testimony previously on Senate Bill 133, I would like to go ahead and go to final action on House Bill 2145. So with that, I will open up to any discussion. Senator Pyle?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the bill, and I brought it with me.
Very.
I didn't bring it with me. I guess Matt got it to me so I could bring it back up. But
You can, Sheila, would you hand those out, or you can hand them out? Oh, do you have enough? Okay.
Mr. Hawk, Senator Hawk needs one. Is Matt available to explain this? Matt, this would be the permit amendment.
Mr. Advisor, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me pull that up on my screen. All right, does everybody see that? Okay,
Yes.
so this amendment would add a new section 1 to the bill. You see that in the large box there, that basically what it would do is it would require that any electric vehicle that was registered in jurisdiction outside Kansas would be required to obtain a permit from the Division of Vehicles prior to being authorized to use any vehicle charging services that were provided in the state. The permit fee would be valid for 1 year, and it would cost $50 for an electric hybrid and $100 for an all-electric vehicle. And then the other changes are conforming changes to the title to reflect that change. Then on page 2, there's the change that was discussed. This would be an amendment to the language that would require for those EV charging services to be exempt from KCC jurisdiction. They would have to be they would have to include a mechanism that was able to identify any electric vehicle using those charging services that was registered in jurisdiction outside Kansas. Happy to try to answer questions the committee has.
Any questions for the revisor or for Senator Pyle? Senator Corson?
Could you explain the second part of the amendment again, Mr. Sterling?
Certainly.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the language of the base bill is exempting EV charging stations for those services from KCC regulation. The amendment would add to that, that in order for them to be exempt from jurisdiction, that those EV charging station would have to have a mechanism installed with that service that would identify an electric vehicle that was registered outside Kansas. So that station would have to be able to identify any vehicle that was not registered in Kansas when they were using those services.
Okay, Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my concern is this seems like we are asking to put a do not visit Kansas if you come in an electric vehicle sign at the entry to our state. How would owners of those vehicles from other states know about this ahead of time, in time to get that permit? Or if it happens to be midnight, are you telling them they can't charge up because they didn't know about it and the Department of Revenue is not open?
Is that a question or a comment?
I'll take it.
Question?
Okay, Senator Pyle?
Thank you. We've already heard testimony that they are equipped with a 1-800 number. I assume that's a manned station, the way he talked. I also understand the electronics are there too, that, you know, anybody that has an electric vehicle that's registered in Kansas very simply will have an identifying number, and they'll be able to clip that in, just like you do at stations now. When it asked for my credit card and it asked for my zip code, I put my zip code in. So an out-of-stater isn't going to have a zip code in Kansas. They're not going to be able to be identified because they don't have that zip code. And if they need a permit, there's a number to call, or that app can be right there on the electronic device that says, do you need a permit? Yes, and swipe your credit card and pay us our money so that you're using our roads and you're paying for them. It's that simple. The technology's there. It can be done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is not the technology. I understand because I've used ChargePoint that it can record, it knows my vehicle, and it knows the kilowatts that I've charged. It's just that, are we asking now the owners of the gas stations to have a relationship with the Department of Revenue. It seems like the Department of Revenue is the one that needs to be issuing these permits. And so that's, my question was, is the Department of Revenue planning to have a 1-800 number that operates 24/7, 365 days a year to do this?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know what the Department of Revenue is planning. I only know that they're probably planning for more money in the future in a lot of ways, because it seems like that's the demand on me and other Kansans right now. And this actually is a demand on other Kansans, the way the bill is originally written, because we're opening it up for charging for out-of-staters who don't pay taxes in Kansas necessarily. But this is a way to answer Senator Fagg's questions, what I brought up previously on 133. This is a way to get some revenue, and I didn't designate the revenue. I would hope that we would put this revenue into the Department of Transportation and the Highway Fund, where it would be used for the appropriate uses. But if that doesn't answer your question, restate it, and I'll try to address it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Corson?
You know, so look, I don't support this amendment, and I think that this amendment is essentially just trying to gut the bill, and I don't understand why we would want to do that. This is a deregulatory bill. This is a pro-growth bill. This is a pro-jobs bill. And whether or not any of us like electric vehicles, it doesn't matter. That's where the market's moving. GM is saying that they're going to have an all-electric vehicle fleet soon, whether or not any of us like it or not. And the question is, I've got the GM, the Fairfax Assembly and Stamping Plant, you know, in the district next to me, and I want them to be bringing in more jobs. And so I think if we're sending the message that we don't want electric vehicles in Kansas, we want to shut our borders, I want them to be bringing in more people, and I want them to be hiring more people and creating more jobs in Kansas. People that are visiting Kansas are going to spend more than $50 or $100. I don't understand why we want to build this wall around Kansas and why we want to keep out jobs when the market is telling us where it's moving. You know, I mean, there was a point made about, well, what if electric batteries fail? They may fail. The market will tell us that. I could go down to leave today and my car battery could be dead. That happens to people all the time. I'm just flummoxed at some of these arguments that are being made that are clearly just attempting to kill what I think is a good pro-jobs deregulatory bill that's going to bring in investment and companies and employment into our state and let the market decide whether or not electric vehicles are going to work. And if there are problems with batteries, the market will tell us that. But it shouldn't be this committee. We should be trying to bring jobs and investment and growth into Kansas.
Senator Pyle?
You know, that's not a bad argument for actually revoking all of the out-of-state permits that we currently require, whether it's hunting, fishing, other things all across the state, because we tell out-of-staters all the time that they have to pay a permit to come to Kansas and to use certain entities or certain activities. This is no different in that sense, and I don't think it'll stop them from coming to Kansas in any way, shape, or form. They'll be glad that we have the electric charging stations and that they can travel up and down I-70 or whatever roads they want to. I think it actually will encourage more of that use. I'm not opposed to electric vehicles, but I do believe that they should pay for what they're using. And if we, you know, when you get on the turnpike, you pay. And when you come into Kansas with an electric vehicle, and we've put the infrastructure in place, and we're providing the utility, they should expect to pay. If they're going to pay for electricity, it's nothing to pay for a permit to use that electricity in the state of Kansas and to drive up and down our roads. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to support the amendment because I drive the turnpike every day and I pay. I could drive the old highway and not pay. I make that choice. You know, also, this is Kansas Power. This is, you know, why should Kansans be subsidizing people out of state? Why should Kansas Power be going to people out of state when it's needed here and you need to use it here? So in my mind, this is just a way to get the revenue to take care of the highways until we get something in place. So I support it.
Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think that this is a discussion we want to have, but I think it's premature. And I think it's premature because we really didn't have any testimony about this. We don't know other things or other states that are doing it. I would like to also include something that says if you put gas in your car in Missouri and you drive in Kansas, want to make sure how, at least we ask how we're paying for our roads that way. So I think it's a better discussion for later time, but I know we have this amendment before us. I would call the question.
Senator Pyle.
I guess I would ask Mr. Chairman.
One more comment, and then we'll go ahead.
Okay. As to prematurity, Mr. Chairman, this should have come first. We've already been putting charging stations in, is my understanding now, and the technology needs to be with them. It's much easier to put in place the policy and as we move forward and build these things than it is to go back and then say, hey, you know, you've already expended X amount of dollars on infrastructure, and now we're going to have to go and tear it up and put something else in. This is not premature. This is actually forward thinking, and everyone in this state and out of state that comes into Kansas already expects to pay for the use of the roads. They're filling up on the interstate today. They're paying our fuel tax. This is nothing out of line with current policy, and it just simply says that if we're going to build EVs, we're going to put for these charging stations, that we are going to have the technology so that we can put a permit in place and get some money for our roads. It's that simple, Mr. Chairman. It's not designed to kill the bill in any way, shape, or form. Thank you.
All righty, we have a motion by Senator Pyle on the EV out-of-state permit. We have a second by Senator Olson. We will go ahead and all those who are in favor of this amendment, say aye. All those opposed? No. I would, that's close. Division. Let's go for division. All those who are in favor, raise their hand. All those opposed? The noes haven't. We're back on the bill. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we have Senate Bill or House Bill 2145. Do I have a motion? Senator Corson.
Mr. Chairman, I move that this committee pass out favorably House Bill 2145.
And a second by Senator Francisco. Motion by Senator Corson to pass out House Bill 2145. Second by Senator Francisco. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, nay. The bill passes. Committee, that's all we have for today. We will have a hearing on House Bill 2367 tomorrow. And thank you for your work. With that, we are adjourned.